With week 11 in the books, for a large majority of you, you only have about 2 to 3 more weeks of the fantasy regular season before the playoffs start, and your dynasty trade deadlines are maybe this week, maybe next week before Thanksgiving. So let's take a look at a few players to sell right now before your deadlines, before these guys' dynasty values really tank. Starting first with Bears running back DeAndre Swift, who has been really good for almost 2 months now, but it is time to jump ship. The main reason why I want out on DeAndre Swift is because he's really just a mediocre running back who took advantage of some seriously good matchups. Since week 5, Swift has not faced one single bad matchup and actually faced 4 bottom 10 defenses, including 2 bottom 3 defenses, and that's led to DeAndre Swift being the RB12 in points per game over that stretch, with 3 games over 19 points. But now look at the defenses he's about to face starting in week 12. He gets the Vikings twice, the Lions twice, the Niners, and the Seattle Seahawks. Minnesota and Detroit are both top 6 against running backs right now. They just shut everything down on the ground. The Niners and Seahawks are below average, but they're intermixed between these horrible divisional matchups that you probably won't trust starting Swift in crunch time against even okay matchups because you're scarred by him not performing against Minnesota or Detroit. So how can you even trust him? It's honestly a very similar end of season schedule to the schedule that he had to start the year when he faced 2 top 12 defenses against running backs and then 2 other average defenses. He had 1 good game in the first 4 weeks and 3 absolute dud weeks when he couldn't even rush for over 30 yards or total over 45 with his receiving work added in. People were legitimately asking if they should drop DeAndre Swift in redraft leagues after week 3. That is how bad he was. So no, I do not want DeAndre Swift on my team to end the year. I don't want to go back to how he was when he started the year. I don't want to have to sit him on my bench when he has value now based on his production over the past month or so. So please sell DeAndre Swift today. The next player we have is another running back in Najee Harris. It's a very similar story as DeAndre Swift in that Najee is also a fairly mediocre running back who also really isn't involved in the receiving game because that's Jalen Warren's job. And he's been coasting through some great matchups in an improved offense under Russell Wilson. But that's all about to change starting this week when he against the Cleveland Browns twice, the Bengals, the Eagles, the Ravens again, and then the Chiefs in championship week. That is the most brutal end of season schedule for all running backs, and he gets 2 matchups against the number 1 and number 2 ranked defenses in Philly and Kansas City during your fantasy playoffs. Listen, I get it. Najee has been doing really well over the past few weeks. He wrecked the Raiders for 100 yards and a touchdown. He wrecked the Jets for 100 yards and a touchdown, wrecked the Giants for 100 yards and a touchdown, all right in a row, bam, bam, bam. Then they had a bye week. They come back to a road matchup against the Commanders that they do end up winning, but Najee only totaled 53 yards on 21 touches, didn't have a single catch, and thank goodness he found the end zone. Otherwise, it would have been just a 5-point fantasy day. And then this past weekend against Baltimore, another game that the Steelers won and were leading for most of the game, only 63 rushing yards, 30 receiving yards for 13.3 PPR points. And I think that's the recipe for the remainder of the year for the Pittsburgh Steelers and Najee Harris. They get a bunch of matchups against either pretty good to really good opposing offenses that their defense can only do so much against. So if Pittsburgh finds himself trailing more, Najee is getting less work, and even when he gets the work, the defenses he faces are really good, so he won't be efficient, and you're going to have to hope that he finds the end zone to give you a double-digit day, or else he'll lose you a week. I don't want that on my roster when I'm looking towards winning a championship, so he is a must-sell right now. And the third running back on this list, I'm just basically going in order of running back rest of season schedule rankings, with Pittsburgh having the worst, Chicago being the second worst, and now the LA Chargers are third worst, and I want to sell JK Dobbins. And as much as this is a schedule thing, there are a couple other factors at play for why I want to sell JK Dobbins in Dynasty. Number 1, at least for the remainder of the year, Gus Edwards is back, and you may not really consider that a major issue, but I kind of do. Before getting hurt, Gus saw 12 touches and 18 touches in week 1 and 2, then only 3 touches in week 3 against Pittsburgh because they were losing and they needed to throw. Then he gets hurt, and the first week back, last weekend, he basically 50-50s the backfield with Dobbins and outproduces him on the ground. Then Sunday night, he got run early on, had 6 of the Chargers' 19 backfield carries, and Dobbins was in for a horrendous fantasy game before his game-winning 30-yard touchdown with like 20 seconds left. So Gus Edwards is a moderate threat for touches to JK Dobbins, who is now becoming a very volume-dependent back. And what I mean by that is that Dobbins is not really a receiving threat. I mean, he gets like 2 to 4 receptions per game, which is nice in PPR leagues to just get a free couple extra points, but he's not doing anything with those receptions. In week 10, he had 3 catches, which is very good, for 5 yards. Not very good. Sunday night against the Bengals, 1 catch, 3 yards. And that's the story of like 80% of Dobbins' game logs as a receiver this year. On top of that, he has only rushed for over 60 yards twice since week 2. So he's not very efficient on the ground. He is extremely inefficient through the air, but he's scoring just enough touchdowns to make himself relevant enough that he is a weekly RB2 starter. But I'm not buying it anymore, especially when you look at his schedule. Starting this week, he gets matchup against Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, then Tampa Bay, Denver, New England during the fantasy playoffs, which aren't actually horrible matchups, but you got to get to the playoffs with JK Dobbins on your team if you want to even play him then. And with a horrendous schedule over the next 3 weeks, you might not make the playoffs with Dobbins in your lineup if you're fighting for that 5 or 6 seed. He's already played Kansas City this year, and he put up 9 PPR points against them. Baltimore is actually a harder matchup for running backs than Pittsburgh is, and he put 8 points against Pittsburgh early in the year. He did put up 17 on Denver already, but without scoring a touchdown, that was only 11 fantasy points on 27 touches. Plus, Denver has drastically improved since then offensively, so they might find themselves in a negative game script if they're trailing for the majority of the game. Are you understanding why I want to sell JK Dobbins right now? I think people just really remember and hold on to his massive performances in week 1 and week 2 because he was great. He was a shiny new thing and a dart throw player that you bought for cheap that people hit on early in the season. So I think he carries name value with solid production value as the current RB13 overall. And out of the 3 running backs that I've highlighted already, Dobbins is the one that should net you the greatest return in a trade because he's still only 25 and he's by far the most productive running back on the season so far. So those are the 3 players that I am vehemently opposed to rostering still by the end of this week or next week at the absolute latest. They just all happen to be at the running back position. I did look at the wide receiver strength of schedules, but no one really stands out as like a must sell for Dynasty. The Vikings have a really tough schedule, but you're not selling Justin Jefferson because of that. But maybe Jordan Addison is a guy that you can pivot off of for better starting options or depth, as he might struggle as the 2nd or 3rd option on the team against really good defenses. Josh Downs also gets Denver and Tennessee during the fantasy playoffs, 2 of the hardest defenses for wide receivers in the entire league. But again, in Dynasty, you're not really selling Josh Downs because of 2 matchups, but I thought I should at least bring it up. Maybe this is more of you should sell Michael Pittman than you should sell Josh Downs. The Commanders also have it rough to end the year with a bye week still in week 14, plus the Eagles again in week 16, so maybe now is the time to explore selling Terry McLaurin. He's had a huge year this year with Jaden Daniels, but he's also turning 30 next year, and on Keep Trade Cut, this is the highest value that he has had in basically 2 years. So now might be a good time to sell before he loses value with a bad end of the year and his age next offseason. The other receiver that I just want to briefly mention is the new hotness of Cedric Tillman. Cleveland's end of season schedule is really, really rough, and Tillman is the one guy that you could probably get a really good piece back for or really use him to upgrade dramatically somewhere else. Starting this week in week 12, Tillman will probably see elite cornerback coverage against Joey Porter twice, Pat Surtain, Trent McDuffie, and Jalen Ramsey. Those are 5 of his last 6 matchups for fantasy football. As a guy that you probably didn't even remember that you drafted last year in your rookie drafts or even got off of waiver wires a few weeks ago, now might be the time to cash in on that and move him before his schedule takes a turn for the worst, and his dynasty value is even more up in the air next offseason. Now, I didn't mention players or draft picks to sell these guys for, but that's really because I made a whole other video specifically on that. So if you're interested in some of the players that I'm looking to buy before trade deadlines, then you can check out that video right up here.